The camera never lies. And on a Tuesday morning in October, 47 million people watched the same 30 seconds on repeat. A man in a $10,000 suit standing behind a podium. His jaw set like concrete, his eyes are cold as a winter sidewalk. His name was Victor Langston, a name that carried weight in certain circles. You wouldn't hear it often on the street, but in boardrooms, courtrooms, and quiet conversations, it was always followed by either admiration or fear. He leaned into the microphone, and the room went quiet the way rooms do when powerful men decide to speak. "I will write a check for $2 million, he said, slowly, like he was reading a verdict, "to anyone who can heal my son." There was a brief silence. Then a journalist raised her hand. Victor ignored her. "I've tried every hospital in 3 countries. I've hired researchers. I've funded experimental trials. So if your God is real, if your crystals work, if your grandmother's root medicine does what you claim," he straightened his cufflinks and smiled, thin and sharp, "prove it. 2 million, cash. Come heal Ethan." The crowd murmured. Someone laughed nervously. Victor laughed too, but his laugh didn't reach his eyes. It never did. 3,000 miles of internet distance away, in a 4th-floor Brooklyn apartment where the radiator knocked every night like it had something to say, a 16-year-old girl sat cross-legged on a second-hand couch and watched that same clip on a cracked phone screen. Her name was Zara Williams. She watched it once, then again, then a 3rd time. Not because of Victor Langston, not because of the money, not even because of the crowd. It was because of the boy, in the background of the clip, barely visible through a window, a hospital room, a small figure in a white bed, pale, still, machines breathing for him. Zara's finger hovered over the screen. She had seen that boy before, not on the news, not in a photograph, but in her dreams. But before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button and tell us where you are watching from. The apartment smelled like the dinner her aunt, Renee, was cooking. Rice and chicken, the kind that took 3 hours and made the whole hallway jealous. Renee Williams had worked the night shift at Brookdale Hospital for 19 years, janitorial staff. She mopped floors that doctors walked on without looking down. She knew every corridor, every supply closet, every family that had ever cried in that East Wing waiting room. She was the kind of woman who held the world up quietly without asking for applause. She poked her head from the kitchen, dish towel over her shoulder. "Zara, baby, put that phone down, food's almost ready." Zara didn't answer right away. "Auntie." Have you seen this video? The Langston man?" Renee walked in slowly, wiped her hands and looked at the screen. A fleeting expression crossed her face, quick as a passing cloud, and then it was gone. "I've seen it," she said quietly. "He's looking for a healer. He's looking for a miracle and calling it a transaction," Renee said. "There's a difference. The boy in the background," Zara said, looking up. "His name is Ethan? That's what they're saying. I dreamed about him, Auntie. 3 nights in a row. I saw his hands. He was reaching for something and couldn't get there." Renee was quiet for a moment that lasted too long. "Zara, I think I'm supposed to go," Zara said. "No." Renee's voice was gentle but firm, the way only someone who loves you can stand their ground without raising it. "You're not going anywhere, near that man. Men like Victor Langston don't see people like us, not in any way that matters. They see value, they see leverage, and when they're finished, they walk away." She turned back toward the kitchen. "Eat first," she said. "Then we pray, that's all." Zara looked back at the phone screen, the frozen image of the boy in the window, the reaching hands in her dream. She didn't say anything else, but she didn't close the video either. Now, to understand why this moment mattered, why Zara mattered, you have to understand what she carried. Not the kind of things you put in a backpack. The invisible kind, since she was small, maybe 4 or 5, Zara had known things she shouldn't know. Felt things before they happened. She'd touch her aunt's shoulder during a headache and the pain would ease. She'd sit beside a crying child on the subway, and they'd quiet down and reach for her hand like she was familiar. Once, at 12 years old, she'd held the wrist of an elderly neighbor named Mr. Gerald, who hadn't left his apartment in weeks. And in the few seconds her fingers rested against his pulse, she'd felt it. Not words, more like weather. A heavy gray sadness, a loneliness so deep it had turned into physical pain. She'd sat with him for 2 hours that evening, didn't say much, just stayed. He passed 2 weeks later, peacefully, in his sleep. His daughter told Renee afterward. He said a little girl with kind eyes came and took some of his pain away. He wasn't afraid anymore. Renee had looked at Zara for a long time after that. She never told her to stop, but she never quite told her to go further either. It was their unspoken agreement. The gift is real, and the world is not ready for it, and neither are you. Zara had spent her whole life at the edge of something she didn't fully understand. Tonight, for the first time, it felt like the edge was pushing back. 53 floors above Midtown Manhattan, Victor Langston stood at the window with a glass of scotch he hadn't touched. The city stretched out like a circuit board from up here. Thousands of lights flickered, lives intersected, movement pulsed in every direction. None of it could fix this. He'd built an empire with these hands. Bought distressed properties, flipped neighborhoods, negotiated deals that made grown men walk away from tables with shaking fingers. He had accountants who had accountants. He had lawyers on retainer in 5 states. He had a contact at the mayor's office who picked up on the first ring. He had everything. And Ethan was still in that bed, his son, 10 years old. Gap-toothed smile that he only showed when he thought no one important was watching. Obsessed with dinosaurs until age 8, then suddenly, with a kid's casual authority, decided trains were better and never looked back. Ethan, who snuck extra sugar into his oatmeal and blamed it on the spoon. Ethan, who cried exactly once at a movie, The Lion King, the scene everyone cries at, and then spent 20 minutes insisting he had something in his eye. That boy was everything. And Victor had stood in a press conference today and turned him into a transaction. He pressed his forehead to the cold glass. "I'm sorry, buddy," he whispered. The city didn't hear him. "I'm trying." His phone buzzed. His assistant, 17 new inquiries since the press conference. Healers, wellness experts, spiritual leaders. A man from Texas who claimed he'd helped a neighbor's dog recover from illness. A woman who sold wellness crystals on Etsy with solid reviews. Victor closed the notification. Somewhere in a room 4 blocks east, the best pediatric specialists in the country were monitoring his son's vitals and shaking their heads in hallways so he wouldn't see. They were running out of ideas. Victor Langston, the man who always had a next move, was running out of time. Tomorrow, Zara Williams would make a decision that would change 2 lives and uncover a secret that had been buried for 17 years. But tonight, both of them were just awake in the dark, reaching for something they couldn't name. Zara didn't sleep. Not really. She drifted in and out of something that felt more like falling than resting. And every time she got close to deep sleep, the dream pulled her back in. The boy's hands, reaching. A hospital room that glowed too bright. The sound of machines that breathed when lungs couldn't. And underneath all of it, like a bass note you feel in your chest before you hear it with your ears, something calling. Not her name, something older than her name. She sat up at 5:47 a.m. and watched the light change, on her ceiling, until she heard Renee's alarm go off down the hall. The shuffle of tired feet, the bathroom faucet, the particular sound of her aunt moving through the world with careful, practiced exhaustion. By the time Renee appeared in the kitchen doorway, scrubs on, hair pinned back, reading glasses already on her face even though she hadn't looked at anything yet, Zara was already dressed. Renee stopped, took her in. Zara in her cleanest jeans, her good hoodie, the burgundy one with no stains. Her hair pulled back neat. Backpack on one shoulder. "No," Renee said. "Auntie, I said what I said last night, Zara, and I heard you." Zara's voice was quiet, but it didn't waver. "I heard every word, and I still feel it, right here." She touched the center of her chest. "Like a hand pulling. I can't explain it better than that." Renee was quiet. She moved to the coffee maker, pressed the button, and stood with her back to the room. "That hospital is my place of work," she said finally. "I know," Zara replied. "If you go in there making scenes," Renee said. "I won't make scenes, or bothering that man's staff, or getting anywhere near his son without permission," Zara assured her. "Auntie," Zara stepped closer, "when have I ever done anything without being called first? That landed." Renee turned around. Her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was deciding something she'd already decided and just needed a moment to accept it. She looked at her niece. This girl she'd raised from an infant. This child of a woman she'd loved and lost. This quiet miracle in a burgundy hoodie, and she exhaled slowly and long through her nose. "You stay with me," she said. "Every step. You don't go near that room without me. And if he tells you to leave, we leave," Zara said. "I promise." Renee poured her coffee, didn't offer any to Zara. She never let her drink coffee. She said it would make her gift too loud. Zara had never fully understood what that meant, but she'd stopped arguing about it at age 13. "Drink some water," Renee said, "and pray first. Before we go anywhere." They stood in the small kitchen, looking down, their hands gently resting on the countertop, and Renee prayed the kind of prayer that isn't really asking for anything. It's more like reporting for duty. Brookdale Manhattan Pediatric Center was not the kind of hospital that smelled like hospitals. It smelled like money pretending to be calm. The lobby had a grand piano no one was playing. The floors were marble. The receptionists wore business casual. There were fresh flowers, actual fresh flowers replaced daily, on every information desk. This was the kind of hospital where the waiting room had a concierge. Renee moved through it like she owned the floors she mopped. Quiet, purposeful, invisible in the way that people who do necessary work are made invisible. She knew every corridor, every elevator code, every staff member who would nod and look the other way, and everyone who would ask questions. Zara stayed close. She kept her hands tucked into her hoodie pocket, not from cold, but from habit. In places like this, her hands picked up too much. The ambient grief of a hospital was thick enough to press against one like the weather. She breathed carefully, steadily. "Don't open up yet," she told herself. "Not until it's time." They took a staff elevator to the 7th floor. The Langston Wing, which, yes, had been named after a donation Victor made 4 years ago before any of this happened, which said everything one needed to know about the kind of man he was and the kind of world that rewards that. The floor was quieter up here, private. A nurse at the station glanced up at Renee, gave a small nod, glanced at Zara. "My niece," Renee said simply. "She's with me." The nurse looked for a moment like she might say something. Then she looked back at her screen. They moved down the hall, room 714. The door was slightly open. Through the gap, the sound of machines, soft, rhythmic, breathing that wasn't quite breathing, and then a voice, low, clipped, on a phone call irritated. "I don't care what the board thinks about the timeline. Push it. Push the whole thing. I'm not leaving New York." Then there was a pause. "Because my son is in a hospital bed, Marcus, that's why. Figure it out." The call ended. Renee touched Zara's arm, "Wait," and knocked twice on the open door before pushing it gently. Victor Langston was standing at the window of his son's hospital room in a charcoal suit, phone still in his hand. His back was to them. He looked like a man who had learned to keep his spine straight even when everything inside him was collapsing, which Zara thought was its own kind of tragedy. On the bed behind him, Ethan. Zara's breath caught. He looked exactly like the dream, smaller somehow than a 10-year-old boy should look. The machines made him seem both held and trapped. His skin was grayish, not quite the right color, like a photograph slightly underexposed. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven intervals. His hands rested at his sides, fingers slightly curled, reaching, even in sleep. Zara felt the pull so strongly her knees nearly buckled. Victor turned. He looked at Renee first, dismissive, automatic, the look of a man who processes staff as background. Then his eyes moved to Zara. They stayed there. A beat. 2. And then his face did something ugly. "What is this?" His voice was quiet, which was almost worse than loud. "Mr. Langston," Renee began, measured. "My name is Renee Williams. I'm on the janitorial staff here on 7. I know who you are." He was still looking at Zara. "Who is she?" "She's my niece. She has a gift for—" "How old are you?" he said to Zara directly, not a curious question, an accusation. 16, Zara said. Something passed through Victor's face, a flicker of disbelief shading quickly into contempt. He laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, like a door slamming. 16. He looked at Renee. "You brought me a teenager from where?" "The projects." "Sir, I went on national television," he said, each word precise and deliberate, and offered $2 million to someone who could save my son. I have been contacted by researchers from Johns Hopkins, specialists from the Mayo Clinic, a neurogeneticist from Geneva who flew in yesterday." He gestured at Zara the way one gesture at something left on the floor. "And this is what you bring to that room, Mr. Langston?" Renee's voice held steady, but Zara could see her hands tighten. "A teenage girl from the janitorial staff's family, in a hoodie." Victor's jaw was tight. "Is this a joke to you? Is my son's life entertainment?" "No," Zara said. He looked at her. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't shifted her stance. She was looking at him with those eyes, calm and deep and slightly too knowing for someone her age. And it stopped him just long enough. "No," she said again gently, "it's not entertainment, and I'm not here for the money." "Then why are you here?" Mr. Langston asked. "Because I've been dreaming about your son for 3 nights, Zara responded. Then there was silence. Victor's expression moved through something she couldn't fully name. Irritation, mockery, and underneath both of those, a thin crack of something raw. He sealed it over immediately. "Get out," he said. "Both of you, get out." His voice rose now, controlled fury, the kind that stays cold even as it burns. "I don't need superstition in this room. I don't need folk remedies and dream interpretations from someone who isn't old enough to drive. My son is dying. Do you understand that? Not in a metaphor, not in a prayer request. Clinically, medically, factually dying. And you come here with dreams." He was breathing harder now. His hand pressed flat against Ethan's bed rail, and for just a second, Zara saw it, the way his knuckles whitened, the way his eyes moved to his son's face against his own will, like he couldn't help checking, constantly checking, still there, still there. She felt the grief come off him like heat from asphalt. It almost knocked her sideways, because underneath all that armor, the suit, the contempt, the cold articulate rage, Victor Langston was a father who was terrified, and terror, Zara had learned, was the loudest thing in any room. She took one slow breath. "Healing isn't bought, Mr. Langston," she said quietly, "and it doesn't check credentials. I know you don't believe me. I know what you see when you look at me." She didn't say it with bitterness, just plainly. "But I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to love your son enough to try one more thing." Victor stared at her. The machines breathed. Ethan's fingers curled slightly, just barely, like a small tide shifting. "You have 30 seconds to leave this room," Victor said very quietly before I call security. Renee touched Zara's shoulder. "Come on, baby." Zara didn't move. She was looking at Ethan's hand. The fingers, just the 4 fingers on his right hand, had opened slightly, like a child reaching for something in sleep, exactly like the dream. "His right hand," Zara said, almost to herself. Victor went very still. "What did you say?" "His right hand keeps reaching," she said. "Even when he's unconscious. The nurses probably think it's a reflex. It's not." She looked up at Victor. "He's been trying to hold on to something. To someone?" The silence in the room changed texture. Victor's face, for the first time since they'd walked in, showed something unguarded, because no one had told her that. No press report, no medical chart, no detail leaked to any media. But Ethan's right hand. Every nurse on the floor had noticed it, had mentioned it to Victor in quiet passing, and he had never told another soul because it felt too private, too precious, too much like the last piece of his son that was still fighting. "How did she know that?" Victor asked. "Security," he said, but his voice was quieter now, less certain. "I'll go," Zara said. "I won't fight you. But Mr. Langston," she paused at the door, "the answer to what's making him sick isn't in any lab. It's in your history. Something hidden." She said it simply, with no drama, the way one would say it might rain later. And then she and Renee walked out. In the corridor, Renee gripped Zara's arm, low and quiet and urgent. "Zara, what you just said in there." "It's true, Auntie," Zara interrupted. "I know it's true." Her voice was tight, almost afraid. "That's what worries me." Zara looked at her. Something in Renee's face was different now. Not just worried, older. Like a door she'd kept shut for a long time had just moved on its hinges. "Auntie," Zara said slowly, "what do you know about that family?" Renee pressed her lips together. "Let's go home," she said. "We'll talk there, Auntie." "Home, Zara." She turned and walked toward the elevator. Zara followed, but she looked back once more at room 714, through the open door. Victor, still standing at the rail, not moving, not calling security, just standing over his son with his hand near that small reaching fist, like a man who'd just heard something he couldn't explain and couldn't let go. She hadn't touched him yet, hadn't healed anything, hadn't exchanged more than a few words with a man who had spent 20 years remaining unreachable. But something had already shifted, quietly, the way foundations shift before the walls show cracks. Victor Langston had spent 48 hours dismissing everyone who came through that door, but Zara Williams hadn't flinched, and that one detail, the right hand, the reaching, was sitting in his chest like a splinter he couldn't find and couldn't ignore. He would call security. Then, he would return to his calls, his specialists, and his meticulously controlled desperation. But tonight, alone in that room with the machines, the silence, and his son's fingers reaching for something unseen, he would think about what she had said, something hidden in his history. He would tell himself it was nonsense. He would tell himself it 3 times, which is always the number that means you already believe it. He told himself it 4 times. That was how Renee's phone rang at 6:47 the next morning. Victor had sat in that room all night. He'd sent his assistant home, dismissed the overnight security detail he usually kept posted in the hall. It was just him and Ethan and the machines and the particular silence of a hospital at 3 a.m., which is unlike any other silence in the world. He had looked up the janitorial staff directory at some point, found Renee Williams, and stared at the name for a long time before finally calling it. She picked up on the second ring. He didn't say hello. He said, "Bring her back." Renee was quiet for a moment. "Please." The word came out uneven, like Victor had to find it in a room he hadn't opened in years. "I'm asking you, please bring her back." Another silence. Then Renee said, "We'll be there in an hour." Zara was already awake when Renee knocked on her door, dressed, sitting on the edge of her bed with her hands folded in her lap, looking at nothing. Renee stood in the doorway and looked at her niece, and felt something she hadn't felt in 17 years. The specific fear of a door opening that you've spent a long time keeping shut. "He called," Renee said. "I know." Zara stood. "I felt it. They didn't say anything else on the bus." Renee prayed quietly with her eyes open, which she only did when things were serious enough that closing them felt like a risk. The 7th floor was calmer in the early morning. Fewer staff. The particular hush of a shift not yet fully awake. Victor was in the hallway when they stepped off the elevator. He'd taken his jacket off at some point. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow. He looked like a man who had argued with himself all night and lost. He looked at Zara. She looked at him. "His vitals dropped again at 4, Victor said. No preamble. "They stabilized, but Dr. Harris says we're close to a point where stabilizing won't hold." He paused. "I don't have more time to be skeptical." "I know," Zara said. "Whatever you need, whatever you room," she said. "You can stay, but stay back." He nodded. Once, the nod of a man who had run out of alternatives and had the self-awareness barely to recognize it. The room was the same. Ethan was the same. Somehow smaller than yesterday, the gray in his skin a shade deeper. His chest moved in the shallow, uneven rhythm that had become its own cruel clock. But his right hand was open, not curled. Open, palm up, resting on the blanket like an offering or an invitation. Zara sat, placed both hands around his and closed her eyes. She found him faster this time, like a frequency she'd already tuned to. The exhaustion was deeper than yesterday. The fighting was quieter, which was worse. She went past it, found the thread again, that thin, unmistakable sameness running between his blood and hers, and this time, she didn't hesitate. She followed it. The vision came. The same woman in the elevator, the torn letter, the grief that was dignified instead of broken. And then further back, a room, an evening, 2 people who had no business being in each other's lives making the very human mistake of believing feeling was the same as choosing. And then forward, a pregnancy, a silence on the other end of a phone, a settlement letter, a woman who tore it up and kept the child and died too young, holding on to both decisions at once. Zara felt the whole of it move through her like weather. Then Ethan's hand tightened around hers, his fingers, all of them, closed, not the unconscious reaching of before. A grip, small and definite and real. The monitor shifted. A nurse made a sound near the door. Zara pressed her thumb to his palm the way she had before and said very quietly, "You can let go of the hurt now. It wasn't yours to carry." Ethan's face changed. The crease between his brows, the small suffering that had been there so long the nurses had stopped seeing it, smoothed out. His color shifted, slowly, then faster than slowly. The gray receding the way fog recedes when light finally has something to push against. The monitors changed their tone. Dr. Harris stepped forward from the doorway. Victor made a sound Zara had never heard from a grown man, low and involuntary, the sound of something long braced against suddenly releasing. Ethan's eyes opened, not dramatic, not a gasp, just open. The way eyes open when sleep has finally, genuinely finished with you. He looked at the ceiling, then at Zara. He looked at her the way children sometimes look at people they've never met but somehow recognize, with a calm, uncomplicated certainty that bypassed every social script. "I saw you," he said. His voice was rough from disuse but steady. "In the dark. You were the one with the light." Zara exhaled. "I know," she said. "I saw you too." Victor was at the bedrail, both hands gripping it. Tears running without any of the performance of crying. Just water. Just release. Just a body doing what it does when the thing it feared most stops being true. "Ethan," he managed. Ethan looked at his father. Then, with the particular directness of a 10-year-old who has no patience for anything that isn't true, he said, "Dad, who is she? She feels like family." The room went very quiet. Victor looked at Zara. Zara looked at Victor. And in that look, that single held moment between them, 17 years of buried things rose to the surface all at once. The affair, the letter, the woman in the elevator, the settlement torn to pieces, a child raised in Brooklyn by a woman who mopped floors 4 blocks from where this man built his empire. The dreams, the reaching hand, the thread in the blood that had pulled one half-sister across a city to save a brother she hadn't known she had. Victor's mouth opened, then closed. His hand gripped the bedrail once more. When he finally spoke, his voice had none of the precision he'd used his whole life as a weapon. It was just a voice, just a man. "I think," he said, "I owe you both an explanation." Ethan looked between them, a 10-year-old just back from the edge of death, still in a hospital bed, and already reading the room the way kids do when they know adults are hiding something large. He didn't ask again. He just held Zara's hand and waited. Victor was still at the bedrail, both hands on it, knuckles returning slowly to their normal color. He was looking at Zara the way one look at something that doesn't fit inside any category one have built. Not hostility anymore, not contempt, something more unsettled than either of those. "What you just did," he said. His voice was low, careful. "Explain it to me." "I can't explain it in a way that would satisfy you," Zara said. "Try." "I felt what was wrong with him, not medically, underneath the medical." She paused. "There's something in his blood that's been fighting itself. Like two things that should match, don't. Like a door with the wrong key forced into it for too long." Victor stared at her. "That's what the geneticist said," he said slowly. "Not in those words. But that's essentially what they said, that his genome has markers that conflict, that something in his DNA is misaligned. They couldn't source it." "I know where it comes from," Zara said. The room was very quiet. "Then tell me," Victor said. Zara looked at him steadily. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She wasn't sure she'd ever really been afraid of him, not in the way he was used to people being afraid of him. She was something else, careful, measured, aware that what she was about to say was the kind of thing that couldn't be unsaid. "It comes from you," she said, "and it comes from my mother." Victor went very still. Not the stillness of a man processing information, the stillness of a man who has just heard a sound he recognized and wished he hadn't. "What did you say?" "My mother's name was Diane Williams," Zara said. "She worked for you 17 years ago. She was your executive assistant on the 14th floor." The color left Victor's face so completely and so fast that Renee took a half step forward from the doorway on instinct. He didn't move, didn't speak, She called you, Zara continued, her voice steady. There was no anger, no drama in her tone. She was simply stating the facts as her aunt had once done for her, clearly and without embellishment. You had your assistant deliver the message. You sent a letter. Stop, Victor said. She tore it up. Stop. His voice cracked on the second one. The machine beeped softly. Ethan was watching his father with an expression that was too old for his face. The particular seriousness of a child who understands that something important is happening even without the full picture. Victor let go of the bed rail. He took 2 steps back, then stopped, like he'd meant to leave and his legs had voted against it. That's not, he started, stopped. His hand went to his mouth briefly. How do you know that name? My aunt told me, Zara said. Last night. Victor looked at Renee. Renee looked back at him without flinching. 19 years of hospital floors. She had long since stopped being intimidated by men in expensive suits. You're her sister, Victor said to Renee. Not a question. I raised her daughter, Renee said simply. After Diane passed, the word past hit Victor like something physical. She saw it, the way his shoulders dropped a fraction, the way his jaw tightened against whatever was trying to come through it. When, he said, Zara was 14 months old, Victor turned away from both of them, faced the window, the city outside going about its morning without any idea what was happening in this room. Nobody spoke. Ethan shifted in the bed. Dad? Victor didn't turn around. Dad? Ethan's voice was quiet but persistent in the way only children can be persistent. Without aggression, just presence, just the simple insistence of needing the person you love to be in the room with you. Victor turned back. His face was undone. That was the only word for it. Everything he'd used to build that face into something untouchable had just been removed all at once, and what was underneath was just a man. Middle-aged and tired and standing inside a consequence, 17 years in the making. He looked at Zara, and Zara watched the moment it happened, the moment he saw it. Her mother in the line of her jaw, in the set of her eyes, the particular way she held stillness like it was a choice and not an absence. His breath came out uneven. He couldn't finish it. Yes, Zara said. Ethan looked at Zara, then at his father, then back at Zara, his brow furrowed, working through it with the methodical focus of a kid who takes dinosaurs and trains seriously and approaches new information the same way. She's your daughter, he said to Victor. Victor said nothing. Is she my sister? Still nothing. Ethan looked at Zara directly. Are you my sister? Zara met his eyes. This boy she'd dreamed about. This boy whose hand had been reaching in the dark. She didn't answer him yet, because that answer didn't belong to her alone, and because some things needed to be handled in the right order. She looked at Victor. That's your question to answer, she said quietly. Not mine. Victor looked at his son. Ethan was waiting, calm and direct and patient in the way kids are patient when they've already decided they can handle whatever the answer is. And Victor Langston, who had negotiated in rooms that made senators uncomfortable, who had never in 30 years of business shown a card he didn't intend to show, had absolutely nothing. No next move, no managed response, no version of this that protected anything. Just a boy in a hospital bed waiting for his father to tell him the truth. Victor sat down on the edge of his son's bed, not a chair, the bed itself, like he needed to be close enough to touch him while he said it. Ethan, he cleared his throat. You know how I always tell you that the worst deals I ever made weren't the ones that lost money? Ethan nodded slowly. The worst ones were the ones where I knew what the right thing was and chose the easy thing instead. He paused. I did that once, a long time ago, before you were born. I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I walked away from something I should have stayed for. Ethan looked at Zara, back at his father. Her, he said. Her mother, Victor said. Which means, yes, her. Ethan was quiet for a moment. So she's my sister, half-sister, yes. Ethan looked at Zara with that uncomplicated directness. I knew it, he said simply. I told you. Zara smiled despite herself. Victor stood, crossed to the window. When he turned back, his eyes were red, but his voice was controlled, not the cold control from before, the harder kind, the kind that cost something. I can't fix what I did, he said, looking at Zara. Your mother deserved better, you deserved better, and I'm not going to sit here and make promises that sound good in a hospital room and mean nothing on the other side of the door. He glanced at Renee. I know what that looks like. I wrote that letter. I know exactly what that looks like. Renee said nothing, but something in her stance shifted, barely, just enough. What I can tell you, Victor continued, is that I'd like to do better, not for absolution, not to feel clean about it. He looked at Zara steadily. Because you just saved my son's life, and because you are his sister, and because your mother raised you to be someone I don't deserve in a room with. The machines hummed. Ethan reached out and took Zara's hand again, casually, like it was already habit. Zara looked at Victor for a long moment. She thought about her mother in that elevator. The letter torn into pieces, the dignity of a woman who refused to be a secret, raised her daughter alone, and died before that daughter was old enough to know her face outside of photographs. She thought about Renee, 19 years of night shifts, cold tea, kitchen table prayers, and a love so steady it had become the whole floor beneath her feet. She thought about 3 nights of dreams, a boy reaching in the dark. She wasn't going to forgive Victor Langston today. That wasn't how forgiveness worked. Not real forgiveness, not the kind that meant something. That would take time and honesty and a lot of days that hadn't happened yet. But she also wasn't going to close the door. My mother believed people were more than their worst moments, she said finally. She was usually right. A beat. Don't make her wrong about it. Victor held her gaze. Nodded once. The nod of a man who understood he'd just been handed something he hadn't earned and intended to treat it accordingly. Renee exhaled slowly from the doorway. The long exhale of someone setting down something heavy, not gone, just rested. Ethan looked between all 3 adults in the room, decided the serious part was over, and said, "Can I get real food now? The hospital stuff tastes like the smell of the hallway." And just like that, the room breathed. Victor laughed, short and genuine and completely unprepared for. The laugh of a man who had forgotten somewhere in the last several months that his son was funny. "Yeah, buddy," he said, voice rough. "Whatever you want." 3 weeks later, Victor Langston held a private press conference. No podium this time, no check. He sat at a table with his lawyer and his publicist, and he told them both beforehand. No managing this, no framing, no strategy, just facts. He announced a $40 million foundation for pediatric genetic research with a specific fund for low-income families who couldn't access experimental treatment. He named it after Diane Williams. When a journalist asked who that was, he said, "Someone I wronged. Someone whose daughter saved my son's life." He didn't say more than that. It wasn't his story to tell. Zara went back to Brooklyn. She finished her junior year, helped Renee with the groceries on Thursdays, sat with the elderly man on the 4th floor who'd stopped leaving his apartment again. Ethan texted her approximately 40 times a week, mostly memes, occasionally questions about whether she thought a T-Rex could beat a modern freight train in a straight collision, and once, at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, just, "Hey, glad you exist." She stared at that one for a while. Then typed back same. Victor called once a month. The calls were short and slightly awkward and improving slowly. The way things improve when the only ingredient is time and neither person is pretending otherwise. He never asked for forgiveness outright. She noticed that and respected it. On a Sunday afternoon, Renee came home from church to find Zara sitting on the fire escape with her hands in her lap, looking out at Brooklyn the way she sometimes did, like she was listening to something just below the frequency of sound. Renee leaned in the window. "You all right?" Zara thought about it honestly before answering, which was always her way. "Yeah," she said. "I think I am." Renee looked at her for a moment. This girl, this child of Diane, this quiet miracle in a burgundy hoodie, who had walked into a billionaire's hospital room with nothing but a dream and a gift she'd never asked for, and come out the other side with a brother, a truth, and the specific, unbothered peace of someone who did the right thing without needing the world to applaud it. "Your mother would have loved to see you," Renee said softly. Zara smiled. Looked back out at the city. "I think she did," she said. The radiator knocked once inside the apartment, like it had something to say, like it always did.